There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I am your host, Richard Shoff. Program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes of Kannapolis, North Carolina. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here only by the grace of God. I want to give you a news update. A few weeks ago, I asked you to join me in prayer for the release of Andrew Brunson, the imprisoned Christian missionary in Turkey. We've had a lot of input. Our president, vice president, the State Department have all put pressure on the Turkish government. And now the president of Turkey, Erdogan, is slamming, quote, evangelist U.S. detention, and says that Turkey will not bow to the threats fueled by an evangelistic and Zionist mentality in the United States. This is the diplomatic crisis between the two NATO countries over the fate of detained American pastors showed no signs of abating. We'll continue on our road that we believe in without making the slightest concession from our freedom, independence, and judicial independence, a quote from Turkey President Erdogan. This according to their official news agency. Continuing, he says, no one will gain anything by threatening us. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to impose large sanctions on Turkey unless Brunson is released. Now, he's an evangelistic pastor arrested on charges of involvement in a coup attempt in 2016. We believe he's entirely innocent of anything on this. Incidentally, folks, I think just the last 48 hours or so that we have placed some sanctions on Turkey. The Turkish Interior Minister says, and I quote, that we will show its strength more forcefully from now on. Some think they can make Turkey kneel for a spy priest. Brunson's case has added to a long list of issues straining ties between the two countries. This since the failed coup attempt in Turkey. They are wanting us, the U.S., to release one of their Iwans, Gulen by name. He's an elderly cleric living in Pennsylvania. Turkey thinks that he was masterminding the coup attempt. He just claims that it's highly unlikely that he was doing anything along those lines. Again, our State Department, our president and vice president are making efforts to obtain this good man's release. Change of subjects, folks. I ask that you listen to me carefully. You're probably going to wonder why I'm spending time on whales. But you're going to see why I'm talking about whales and how it all buttons up in the second part. But there's an orca whale mourning her calf's death by carrying her body around for days. This was first reported some 9 or 10 days ago. An endangered orca whale died shortly after its birth, and the calf's mother has been tending the body for 3 days. This is an earlier report. The calf was born near Victoria, British Columbia. That's located about 75 miles northwest of Seattle. Researchers began to track southern resident killer whales respond to the scene. The Center of Whale Research has reported on this incident. The organization observed the baby's corpse sinking and the mother repeatedly bringing it back to the surface. The mother supported her offspring's body on her forehead as she pushed it toward an island. Then the mother, labeled J35, entered her third day of mourning. This with the calf on its nose. And it's still happening. It's continued for the last 9 or 10 days. The organization overseeing this, watching the killer whales and the dolphins, say this shows a strong mother-offspring bond and that they sometimes transport the dead calves for up to a week. Southern resident killer whales are a clan of 76 orcas in imminent danger of extinction. They claim this is a horrible thing to watch. This is an animal that is a sentient being, a quote from the organization observing it. The whale understands the social bonds that it has with the rest of its family members and the organization reporting it. The mother is bonded to the calf, and she does not want to let it go. It's that simple. She's grieving. The Center for Whale Research says the situation for southern resident killer whales is dire. 3/4 of newborns in the past 2 decades have died, and no successful pregnancies have been observed in the past 3 years. The whales face 3 major challenges: toxins, ship traffic, and a lack of food, especially Chinook salmon. That food source is largely endangered itself, the Center for Whale Research says. Then I have a later article on the same subject that points out that the grieving mother orca whale is falling behind her family as she carries her dead calf for a 7th and 8th day. The orca whale, named J35 or Tahlequah, carried her dead calf for a 7th and 8th day. Researchers are keeping vigil over the orca mother. Now she's falling behind her pod. They note, "I'm so terrified for her well-being," said researcher Deborah Giles. She's a 20-year-old breeding-age female, and we need her. A grieving mother orca is reported is falling behind her group as she labors through the water at about 6 knots, continuing to carry her dead calf in a 7-day period of mourning. J35, or Tahlequah, gave birth the morning of July 24th to the calf, which lived for only about a half an hour. The mother has refused to let go of it ever since. She's carrying the infant either by one fin or pushing it through the water on her head. Last Tuesday, in an update, the researchers searched all day for the grieving orca mother. Then they found her, still clinging to her calf for the 8th day. "Sometimes it just looks like a silver wave," said Jenny Atkinson. She's executive director of the Whale Museum at Friday Harbor. That's where the Sound Watch program is run from, and that they're monitoring the mother continuously from a distance in daylight hours. J-Pod, the mother's clan, has been staying with her and has turned out in force with more members of the pod by the day, staying with her. Researchers who work with the critically endangered orcas are concerned for the mother's health, and they ache for her. "I am so terrified for her well-being," said Deborah Giles. She's a research scientist for the University of Washington and a research director for the nonprofit Wild Orca. They said this whale is a 20-year-old breeding age female, and we desperately need to keep her alive. Well, we now have shared drone footage of the mother, J35, taken Friday as she carried her dead calf along the west side of the San Juan Island. It was reported the whale was in labor at this time last week, that's a week previous, and probably was not eating then. And they note that they feel so sad for that family and for her mental state. She must be in anguish. What is beyond grief, they ask. I don't even know what the word is for that. But that is where the mother is. The calf remains intact day after day, perhaps preserved by the cold water. Every time it slips from her grip, Tahlequah has to dive deeply to retrieve it. She has to prime herself 6, 7 breaths to take a deep dive, a long dive, to go get the carcass, Giles said, and she added, "What is killing me is when is it going to be the last time?" And she has to make that decision not to go get it. To Giles, the sad story seems like a metaphor for a region stuck on its own grief over the declining whales. On Sunday a week ago, Tahlequah was surrounded by her entire family. Researchers who are with the whales daily have been concerned for her especially as to whether she's getting enough to eat. "This has to be so hard on her," said Michael Weiss from the University of Exeter, where he's with the Center for Whale Research. Taylor Shayad was also watching from the Sound Watch boat when he saw Tahlequah breach 3 times Saturday evening, and her body still looked healthy, he reported. On last Monday, Sheed and his crew continued their vigil with the mother, sighting her still carrying the calf. Falling behind the group, but J17, that's their family line, are 500 to 600 yards ahead, and the rest of the J pod are a mile or so ahead of them. She's been traveling at speeds up to 6 knots. Observed her drop the calf. She swims in a tight circle breathing about 6 times before taking a deep dive to retrieve the dead calf. J35 continues to carry her calf into Sunday morning. This would be a week ago now, folks. Other members of the J-Pod, her clan, have been staying with her. The boat captain said that they keep equipment for an oil change at the ready for the boat so they can quickly get it back out and keep watching and protecting. They note they feel like a NASCAR pit crew. We need to keep that boat on the water. It's been moving to watch the family as they stand by her. We believe the pod has been taking turns with this to stay with the mother. Sound watches, the boat, is watching too. We are respectfully monitoring from a distance. We're committed. We're here to help her through this. In addition to monitoring her conditions, the Sound Watch crew is helping to keep boaters away from the whales. The nonprofit has educators in the water every day during the whale watch season to keep the boaters the required 200-yard distance from the whales. But this has been a season like no other as the world watches and holds its breath over the grieving whale and her baby. Folks, I want you to stop and draw a comparison here. Now let's look at the humans. You know, human beings are the top of the food chain. Humans, we have superior intelligence. We have great reasoning. And these powers lead us to compassion. Humans have the ability to train doctors to find medical cures. Look at us and where we so often are. The human race, the top of the food chain. We don't care for our calves. We so often are murdering our own babies. Since Roe versus Wade, how many mothers, human mothers, have deliberately killed, murdered, slaughtered their unborn calves? Their calves, baby humans, often not even allowed to be born. Millions, folks, are the numbers that we have let died or deliberately murdered. And we're the top of the food chain. We're the superior intelligent ones. Wow, there's something wrong with this, folks. But the rest of us, where have we been? Where's our voice? Where are Christian voices, evangelicals, pro-life Catholics? Us with our great minds and abilities and our superior reasoning powers. Top of the food chain, children of God. Where have our voices been for these numerous decades as we allow the slaughter of our own human calves? Doesn't it make you think? You know, folks, you and I are going to stand before an almighty God. Because when we don't speak, we really do speak. And when we don't act, we really do act. Thank you for letting me share that with you. And now to our president's efforts in the area of our immigration problem. President Donald Trump is begging Congress to step up and fix the nation's broken immigration system. He's less concerned about shutting down the federal government, whether it's before or after the midterm elections. The president is not focused on the timing of before or after, said Sarah Sanders. He's been talking about this for a year and a half. You know, our immigration system is completely broken. Trump is begging and has been for Congress, particularly Democrats in Congress, to step up and do their job. Stop kicking the ball down the field and work with him to fix the system. It's that simple, said Sanders. Since last Sunday, a week ago, President Trump has repeatedly vowed to shut down the government in September if he doesn't receive his $25 billion in funding for a wall on the U.S. border with Mexico. This a part of his comprehensive immigration reform package. His declaration caught Republican leaders by surprise. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, House Speaker Paul Ryan, they both said they opposed a shutdown. On Tuesday, Trump tweeted, "I don't care what the ramifications are in closing down the government," which he said was a very small price to pay for a safe and prosperous America. And a related article, folks, what cost are you willing to pay? Your answer is going to decide whether America becomes a third world country or not. A new study compiled by FAIR is the Federation for American Immigration Reform. They've discovered that approximately 11 million illegal immigrants cost the U.S. taxpayers about $135 billion per year in medical, education, and law enforcement expenses. Now there's a slight offset to this. The illegals actually pay about $19 billion a year in taxes. Well, that leaves a deficit of $116 billion left on America's shoulders. And folks, yes, that's a yearly deficit. The question you must ask yourself is, quote, is America turning into a third world country by the massive amount of debt caused by immigration, and is it worth it? Well, the fight is on over the U.S. government shutdown. Ryan and McConnell say no. No funding for the border wall. Never Trump Republican Paul Ryan and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told reporters this past week they will not fund the Trump border wall in the upcoming spending bill. Hal Turner notes, this is a direct defiance of the American people, and it should be confronted directly. Ryan and McConnell passed a record $1.3 trillion spending bill in March. The spending bill funded Planned Parenthood and sanctuary cities, but not the Trump border wall. And now the Republican Party leaders are going to stick it to President Trump and his voters once again. They're not going to fund the border wall in September. Turner notes that during a radio interview with WHAS, weekend Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said the wall on the U.S.-Mexico border will likely not make it into the next funding legislation, which must be passed by the end of September in order to avoid another government shutdown. When directly asked if the funding of the border wall would have to wait until after midterm elections, the Republican senator replied, probably, noting that it is something Democrats and Republicans have a disagreement on. But most of the government will be covered. And then by the end of the year, if we can't reach an agreement on that, we'll do what's called a continuing resolution for that little portion of the government spending that's left unpassed in individual bills. McConnell added, Trump wants the Senate to go nuclear to pass the border wall funding. McConnell and Speaker House Paul Ryan met with Trump to discuss the funding legislation. The following day, Ryan also indicated the wall funding looked unlikely to be included in the current legislation. Well, what was Trump's reply? Here's what he tweeted. I would be willing to shut down the government if the Democrats do not give us the votes for border security, which includes the wall. Must get rid of the lottery, catch and release, etc., and finally go to a system of immigration based on merit. We need great people coming into our country. Trump's last Sunday tweet is likely to spark a high-stakes showdown with Democratic lawmakers who have pledged not to give in to his demands. The fight could lead right into the November midterm elections and put the immigration as a centerpiece issue in the last stages of the campaign season. Well, Hal Turner's got a good reminder. I'm going to share it with you. He notes that in 2007 he published the names and home addresses of members of the U.S. Senate in order to allow the general public to bypass staff flunkies and go directly to the man for redress of grievances over then-pending amnesty for illegal aliens. That bill failed when 18 senators who voted in favor of the bill 3 days earlier changed their votes after being swamped by citizens. Well, Congress was so upset at what it did, they passed the law against it. So Congress, are you going to defy the American people again? Here's what we can do. We can again publish your home addresses. We can publicly publish them. I did it once, and I can do it again. When he did it before, 18 of you changed your mind. Your home addresses are public records, he notes. The property tax records of each local county parish are still public. There is no expectation of privacy from public records, and the First Amendment prohibits Congress from abridging freedom of the press. So, I can publish this information again, says Turner. We elected Donald Trump as president substantially because we want an end to illegal immigration via a porous southern border. Instead, you folks in Congress have chosen to do the bidding of giant corporations who want mass immigration, which drives down wages, supply and demand. Well, that keeps labor costs cheap, doesn't it? Those corporations fund your campaigns and you kiss their butts for it. There's also widespread belief among the general public that a slew of you are making money from drug trafficking crossing our southern border. If that wasn't bad enough, there's also a substantial number of Americans who believe you keep the border open to allow smuggling of children for pedophiles infesting Congress who want fresh meat to rape. All of this must end by the building of the wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. It must end in this coming budget bill. Further delay will not be tolerated. So Congress, what do you think your neighbors will do if your whole neighborhood becomes one giant protest because of you? What would your friends and family and your neighbors feel like if 10,000 people are around your house because you won't do what your constituents demand? Think about it. Because it's not only possible, folks, it's very likely to happen. And more about Trump's action on immigration. Well, the White House is considering reducing the number of refugees allowed into the United States. The White House is considering another reduction in the number of refugees it will allow to resettle in the U.S. This according to two government officials and another person familiar with the talks. The Trump administration is showing less resistance to the idea because Stephen Miller, that's Trump's senior policy advisor, he's the architect of Trump's anti-immigration agenda, he's installed his allies who are prepared to sign off on the reductions. Trump set the cap at 45,000 in 2017. That amount was the lowest number of refugees admitted to the U.S. since the program was launched in 1980. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, whose department's been a strong supporter of the refugee program, is now being advised by aides close to Miller. That number would amount to a lower number than that were admitted in the wake of September 11th, 2001. Sarah Sanders stated, and I quote, "We want to make sure that we have the processes in place and the ability to vet any individual that would come into this country. If the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies that would work in coordination to determine that they don't have the ability to vet a certain number, then the president would have concerns with that. The number one priority is national security and making sure we have the ability to properly vet and process any individual that comes into this country." And let me ask you something, folks. Let me ask you this. Do you remember when it was fashionable to be tough on immigration? Fashion goes in and out of style, from bell-bottoms to wide neckties. Once upon a time, it was cool to wear a powder blue leisure suit and sport long sideburns and a mustache. Now it looks kind of silly, doesn't it? Unless you're going to a 70s theme party. Being tough on illegal immigration was once as cool as saddle shoes and a poodle skirt. And not nearly as long ago when those clothes were in style either. Today, taking a firm stand, a reasoned approach to America's immigration problems, now it's considered woefully out of fashion. Kind of like sporting a Hitler toothbrush mustache and jackboots at your local synagogue. Unless you think it's jesting about Nazis, President Donald Trump has been called a Nazi by some prominent Republicans, including General Michael Hayden, and by many media types over his novel idea of enforcing existing immigration law. The media is in a feeding frenzy, devoting virtually all network news coverage to Trump's enforcing existing laws. 176 minutes over several days. Now it's cool for the media to be critical of immigration enforcement. 2 years ago, in July 2016, the New York Times dipped its toe into the waters of criticism with an editorial concerned about children caged in the Obama detention centers. The rest of the media, however, didn't think it was cool to blast the sitting president. They only devoted 6 minutes of coverage. Media outrage, out of style in the Obama era, now back at the height of fashion during the Trump presidency. Folks, it wasn't always that way. A president acting tough on immigration was fashionable just 2 years ago. ABC News cheerily ran an article in August 2016 They noted, quote, Obama has deported more people than any other president. So there. Who might have such a headline been directed to? The first line of the ABC News article answers, Donald Trump's immigration plan is set to be announced later this week. Anything to counter candidate Trump's initial popularity over his tough stand on illegal immigration. Haven't fashions changed? Being tough on immigration, illegal immigration, today is gotcha. ABC News now says, quote, uproar grows as administration digs in on child separation policy. No uproar when Obama was a deporter-in-chief, only when Trump carries out the same executive duties as Obama. We fell from bell-bottoms to skinny jeans, folks. Left-wing News Week in 2017 told us that President Trump, quote, the law and order candidate had fallen short and that Obama had deported more illegal immigrants. They implied that Obama was soft on illegal immigration, saying, quote, he hasn't even managed to beat former President Barack Obama's record, end quote. Trump can't hold a candle to their guy Barack, even in his signature issue on illegal immigration. Well, fashions changed in just a year. From Obama's deporting every illegal he could find to a new style with the same Newsweek saying, quote, Trump's separation policy backlash. Governors refused to send National Guard to border over inhuman treatment of children. Well, folks, it wasn't inhuman when Obama had kids in cages, but it certainly is when Trump does. Neckties to no ties, how fashions change. New fashions for Newsweek, cheering last year's outrage this year. They even acknowledge that Obama held double the number of children in shelters compared to the Trump White House. They captured children of Obama, brought little criticism, and mostly praise, as he was being a tough law and order kind of guy. The immigration enforcement fashion of the Bush and Obama years were in style for General Hayden. They were in style for Laura Bush and her brother-in-law Jeb and the rest of the magpies in the media and the Democrat Party. But when Trump does the same, not even as well as Obama, according to Newsweek, these same strong, silent types are dripping with outrage, comparing Trump's actions to Nazi concentration camps and our Japanese internment camps. My, how quickly the fashions changed. What was in last year's definitely out this year, isn't it, folks? Even Hillary Clinton was at one time tough on immigration, with no media outrage. Back in 2014, she believed that illegal child immigrants could, quote, be sent back. Not so much today, as she happily piles on Trump for doing exactly what she recommended them. It's an interesting aside. Obama uses the same cages to detain illegal border crossers as Trump is now using. The media believes it wasn't really a rage when Obama did it, more like a suite at the Four Seasons. But fashions change, and last year's hotel suites are this year's animal cages. Honest journalists could compare and contrast approaches of different administrations, find more similarities they could than differences. Look at the reasons for detention and deportation, then they offer ideas to improve the efficiency of the system. Thoughtful investigation and analysis, not wild-eyed hysteria. Instead of journalists, we have community organizers with bylines, creating phantom issues for the sole purpose of influencing public opinion and future elections. Russia is in their wildest dream, couldn't have the influence on the American electoral process that the U.S. media has. So we are treated with another manufactured outrage. Folks, we had Russia, then we went to Stormy, now to immigration. The flavor of the month, to beat on Trump and Republicans, all because of Trump's success, popularity, and of course the upcoming midterm elections. And folks, I want to point out something to you. It just came out this week. Trump hits 50% approval rating in the Rasmussen poll. President Donald Trump hit 50% approval in a Rasmussen poll released just this last Thursday. 50% approve of Trump's performance against 49% disapproval. It was only back on July 24th that a Gallup poll showed Trump at 41.9. That was then his highest Gallup rating. So it seems like the father is intervening in our president's behalf. Could this be the result of our prayers as we pray for his added guidance? The protection of he, our vice president, our administration? Prayer in the hand of God put our president in the White House. Our continued prayers are needed for his protection, his guidance, those for him personally and for his administration. Goodbye until next week.